Do you think serial killers are just broken people who snap? What if I told you that some of the most notorious murderers in history were connected by something darker, something authorities have systematically erased from public record? The story I'm about to share has been buried by federal agencies, scrubbed from databases, and dismissed as fiction by those with everything to lose if the truth gets out. This is the story of the Gemini Killer. The first documented case connected to what would later be known as the Gemini Killer occurred in 1952. In the small coastal town of Port Haverton, Maine, local fisherman Thomas Welch returned home after a standard day at sea. His wife Margaret noted nothing unusual about him that evening, except that he seemed unusually quiet during dinner. The next morning, Margaret woke to find Thomas gone from their bed. She discovered him in their bathroom, meticulously carving twin parallel lines into his forearm with a fishing knife. When she screamed, he turned to her with eyes she would later describe to authorities as empty, like looking through windows into an abandoned house. Thomas murdered his wife and their 2 children before noon. When police arrived, they found him sitting at his kitchen table, perfectly calm, his arms marked with dozens of twin parallel cuts. When questioned, he spoke only one sentence: "The stars want symmetry." He was committed to Augusta State Hospital, where he remained catatonic until his death 17 days later. Cause of death: unknown. Medical records indicated no physiological reason for his sudden expiration. The coroner noted only that Thomas died at precisely 12:00 p.m., the exact midpoint of the day. Symmetry. The case was forgotten. A tragic but isolated incident. Nothing connected to anything larger. 10 years passed. In 1962, across the country in Riverside, California, college librarian Helen Maddox began logging strange behavior among certain students using the astronomy section. Over a period of 3 weeks, she noticed 6 different students, who apparently didn't know each other, all exhibiting the same peculiar habit. They would pull the same obscure text on celestial phenomena, open it to page 212, and stare at a particular star chart without turning pages. Each student would remain fixated for exactly 21 minutes before returning the book and leaving without checking anything out. Helen finally examined the page herself. The chart showed the Gemini constellation. Nothing seemed unusual about it, except someone had made faint pencil marks connecting stars beyond the traditional constellation pattern, creating what looked like a symmetrical face with 2 vertical lines down its center. The night after her discovery, all 6 students committed murder-suicides. Each killed their entire household before taking their own lives. In each case, the bodies were arranged in perfect symmetrical patterns. Each suicide victim had carved twin parallel lines into their forearms. Each had written the same phrase on a nearby wall: "The stars want symmetry." Local police investigated but found no connection between the students beyond their university attendance. The FBI briefly looked into the case but closed it within weeks. The book with the star chart disappeared from evidence lockup. Helen Maddox, who continued to insist there was more to the story, was fired from the university. 3 months later, she was committed to a psychiatric facility after repeatedly claiming she was being followed by people with twin shadows. She died in the facility 6 months later. Hospital records indicated she expired at exactly 12:00 p.m. The incidents were classified, sealed, forgotten until 1972. In suburban Chicago, pediatrician Dr. James Whitaker began noticing something disturbing. Over a 2-month period, 12 different children, all born on the cusp between Taurus and Gemini, came in with the same unusual complaint. Each child between ages 5 and 12 reported identical nightmares about the twin man who would stand at the foot of their beds, making a cutting motion across his arms. More alarmingly, each child had begun sleepwalking, and parents reported finding them staring at the night sky through windows, sometimes for hours, always perfectly still. Dr. Whitaker began keeping detailed notes. He consulted a local astronomer who mentioned that Gemini was particularly visible that season. Whitaker began calling parents of affected children, organizing a meeting to discuss the pattern he was seeing. The night before the scheduled meeting, All 12 children murdered their families in their sleep. Each child was found catatonic with twin parallel cuts on their arms. In each home, the same phrase was written on a wall: "The stars want symmetry." Even more disturbing, all 12 incidents occurred simultaneously at precisely midnight, the boundary between one day and the next. Symmetry. Dr. Whitaker never made it to the UDA police station to share his notes. His car was found abandoned on the highway. His body was never recovered. His office was destroyed in an electrical fire that same night, erasing all patient records. The FBI file on the case was permanently sealed under national security protocols typically reserved for matters of grave public danger. The children were separately institutionalized and all records of their conditions were classified. These events were buried, erased from public memory. But they continued. Twin Falls, Idaho. 7 members of a local amateur astronomy club disappeared while observing a meteor shower. They were found 2 weeks later in an abandoned mine shaft, each with their wrists bearing twin parallel cuts. They had apparently lived in the shaft for days, using their own blood to paint an enormous star chart on the rock walls, focusing specifically on the Gemini constellation. At the center of their chart, they had drawn a face with 2 vertical lines down its center. Their bodies were arranged in perfect symmetrical patterns around the chamber. No suicide notes were found, but a park ranger who discovered the scene reported that the words, "The stars want symmetry," were written in blood near the entrance. The ranger who reported this detail was later found to have committed suicide, twin parallel cuts on his wrists. His body discovered at exactly 12:00 p.m. The FBI sealed the case. All physical evidence disappeared from state police custody. The mine shaft collapsed in what was ruled a natural structural failure 3 days after the bodies were removed. By the 1990s, a pattern had emerged, but only to those few who had been connecting the dots. Every 10 years, a cluster of murders occurred, always with the same signature elements: twin parallel cuts, symmetrical arrangements, references to stars, and the phrase, "The stars want symmetry," always connected to the Gemini constellation, always involving people who had been behaving strangely for weeks before their violent actions, always followed by convenient accidents, suicides, or disappearances of witnesses or investigators who looked too closely. In 1992, the pattern evolved. New York City. Over a 3-week period in May, during Gemini season, 8 seemingly unconnected individuals committed identical crimes. Each entered a public space, identified a person born under the Gemini sign, and killed them before taking their own lives. In each case, the killer had twin parallel cuts on their wrists that forensics determined were several days old. Each had the same phrase written somewhere on their person: "The stars want symmetry." NYPD Detective Marcus Rivera noticed something nobody else had connected. Each killer had visited the same obscure planetarium exhibit on Gemini mythology within the week before their crimes. Security footage showed each of them standing motionless before the same star chart for exactly 21 minutes before leaving. Rivera began investigating the planetarium and discovered something chilling. The exhibit had been funded by an anonymous donor and installed by contractors who couldn't be traced. Rivera took his findings to his superiors, but was immediately removed from the case. 3 days later, he was found dead in his apartment. Official cause of death: suicide. Twin parallel cuts on his wrists. Time of death: exactly 12:00 p.m. The cases were individually closed. No connections were officially acknowledged. The planetarium exhibit was quietly removed and replaced. All security footage from the facility during the relevant time frame was corrupted in what was described as a server malfunction. Something or someone was systematically erasing the pattern. The question is why. In 2002, the pattern shifted again. Internet forums dedicated to astronomy began reporting an unusual phenomenon. Users across different platforms described seeing a face in Gemini when observing the constellation, a face not formed by the traditional star pattern, but by faint stars normally invisible to the naked eye. More disturbing were reports that after seeing this face, observers experienced intense migraines, followed by vivid dreams about cutting symmetrical lines into their skin. Within a month of these reports emerging, 23 people across 4 countries committed identical crimes. Each killed individuals born under the Gemini sign before committing suicide. Each had twin parallel cuts on their wrists. Each left the same message: the stars want symmetry. An anonymous data analyst at the FBI noticed the pattern and began compiling cases, creating a database of all incidents sharing these characteristics dating back to the 1950s. 3 weeks into this project, the analyst disappeared. Their apartment was found empty, with their computer missing. On the bathroom mirror, etched into the glass, were 2 parallel lines. The forum threads discussing the face in Gemini were systematically deleted across all platforms. Users who had reported seeing it were banned for spreading misinformation. Several prominent posters disappeared entirely from the internet, their digital footprints erased as if they had never existed. 2012 brought the most disturbing evolution yet. Instead of a cluster of isolated incidents, the pattern manifested as a coordinated event. On June 1st, the beginning of Gemini season, 12 individuals in 12 different cities around the world entered hospitals and targeted patients born between May 21st and June 21st. Each killer had twin parallel cuts on their wrists. Each killed exactly 3 Gemini-born patients before being apprehended. Each, when questioned, gave the exact same statement word for word. The stars want symmetry. The twins must be unified. The pattern must be completed. Most disturbing of all, medical examinations revealed that all 12 killers were themselves born on the exact same day at the exact same time, despite having no knowledge of each other and no apparent connections. Each had experienced a sudden awakening, their word, 3 weeks prior, during which they felt compelled to study Gemini constellation charts for hours each night. Authorities in each country treated these as isolated incidents. No official acknowledgement of the pattern was ever made public. All 12 killers died in custody within 24 hours of their arrests, all at exactly 12 p.m. local time, all from sudden cardiac arrest with no apparent medical cause. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a psychiatrist who had interviewed 2 of the killers, began noticing the pattern independently. She reached out to colleagues in other countries who had been involved in the cases. Within days of beginning this correspondence, all of her international contacts ceased responding. Her research files were stolen in what police classified as a random burglary. Her academic credentials were suddenly revoked due to administrative errors. When she persisted in her investigation, she was committed to a psychiatric facility for stress-induced delusional disorder. She remains there today. No visitors allowed, no outside contact permitted. The pattern continued in 2022, but with a technological evolution that makes it infinitely more dangerous. Instead of physical star charts or planetarium exhibits, the trigger spread through digital means, specifically through astronomy apps and online star mapping tools. Users who viewed the Gemini constellation through these platforms began reporting unusual visual artifacts, what they described as a face with twin lines appearing briefly in the star pattern. Those who saw it experienced intense migraines followed by compulsive behavior, drawing the same pattern repeatedly, staring at the night sky for hours, and eventually carving twin parallel lines into their skin. The digital infection spread further. Users who had viewed these contaminated constellation images began posting seemingly normal photos online that contained hidden visual triggers, invisible to casual viewers but processed by the subconscious. These images spread across social media, creating more carriers, more viewers experiencing the migraines, the compulsions, the eventual violence. 37 murder-suicides occurred across 17 countries within a 3-week period, all following the identical pattern. Each perpetrator had twin parallel cuts. Each targeted Gemini-born victims. Each left the same message: the stars want symmetry. Tech companies silently removed the affected astronomy apps. Social media platforms implemented invisible filters to catch and remove the contaminated images. No public announcements were made. No connections were acknowledged. The incidents were reported as isolated tragedies, random acts of violence in an increasingly unstable world. But someone was watching. Someone was documenting. Someone was connecting the dots that others were systematically erasing. 3 months after the 2022 incidents, an anonymous package arrived at major news outlets containing a comprehensive dossier, thousands of pages documenting the Gemini Killer pattern back to its earliest recorded instance in 1952. The dossier included crime scene photos never released to the public, FBI reports that had been officially denied, medical records that had supposedly been destroyed, and a detailed analysis connecting every incident through their identical characteristics. None of the news outlets published the information. Within 24 hours, all known copies of the dossier disappeared from their offices. Journalists who had viewed the materials reported sudden migraines followed by memory gaps, unable to recall specific details of what they had read. One copy survived. A junior reporter had made personal photographs of several pages before they disappeared. She began investigating independently, connecting with others who remembered fragments of the pattern. They formed a loose network, communicating through coded messages on obscure forms, piecing together the history of the Gemini Killer. Their conclusion was more terrifying than the sum of the incidents. This was not a serial killer, not a cult, not even a contagious psychosis. The pattern itself was the killer, a mimetic entity that used human minds as vectors, spreading through visual triggers, colonizing consciousness, compelling actions. It had evolved over decades, adapting to new technologies, finding new ways to propagate itself. But why? What was its purpose? The answer came from an unlikely source, a retired astronomer who had been quietly tracking unusual stellar phenomena for decades. The Gemini constellation had been exhibiting subtle but measurable changes. Stars that shouldn't be visible to the naked eye had been gradually brightening. The constellation's traditional pattern was slowly being augmented by these emerging stars, creating a new configuration, one that, when mapped, created the image of a face with 2 vertical lines down its center. More disturbing still, these stellar changes defied all known laws of astrophysics. Stars don't simply brighten over decades, their positions don't shift in coordinated patterns, unless something is causing it, unless something is using them. The astronomer's theory, the Gemini Killer, wasn't just a pattern of murders, it was a communication method, a way for something beyond our world to gradually reshape human perception, to make us see the face in the stars, to make us receptive to whatever came next. The network of investigators came to a horrifying conclusion. The 10-year cycle was building toward something. Each decade's incidents were more numerous, more coordinated, more technologically sophisticated than the last. The "stars want symmetry" wasn't just a compulsive phrase, it was an instruction. The killings weren't just violence, they were sacrifices. The twin parallel cuts weren't just a signature, they were a symbol. Opening doorways between worlds. Every person who sees the pattern becomes a conduit. Every Gemini victim is an offering. Every 10 years, the boundary between our world and whatever exists on the other side grows thinner. And 2032 is approaching. The network of investigators went silent 3 months ago. Their communications ceased simultaneously. Their online presences disappeared. Attempts to contact them physically have revealed empty apartments, canceled phone numbers, concerned families reporting their loved ones missing. The retired astronomer was found dead in his home. Official cause, natural causes, actual scene, body positioned in perfect symmetry, twin parallel cuts on his wrists. Time of death, 12 p.m. exactly. The pattern continues, it evolves, it spreads. Perhaps you've been experiencing unusual migraines recently. Perhaps you found yourself drawn to star charts, to constellation apps, to images of twins or symmetrical patterns. Perhaps you've awakened from dreams of cutting lines into your skin, of faces in the stars watching you, of voices whispering about symmetry and completion. Perhaps you're already part of the pattern. Look at the night sky tonight. Really look at Gemini. Do you see it? The face with 2 vertical lines? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It becomes clearer each night. Watching, waiting, the boundary between worlds thinning with each passing day. The stars want symmetry. And now you know why. But here's what truly terrifies me. You're watching this right now. You're absorbing these words, these ideas, these patterns. And somewhere in this video, embedded in frames you consciously didn't notice, was the image, the face in the stars, the twin lines, the visual trigger that has now been processed by your subconscious. The migraines will start soon. The dreams will follow. You'll find yourself drawn to the night sky. You'll see the face in Gemini. You'll understand the symmetry. You might be thinking this is just a story, a fabrication. But ask yourself, why have you never heard of these connected cases before? Why does searching for Gemini Killer return nothing relevant in official databases? Why have all these patterns been systematically erased from public record? The truth has been hidden because it spreads through knowledge itself, through stories, through videos like this one, through your attention right now. If you've made it this far, you're already part of it. The pattern has you. Watch for the migraines, watch for the dreams, watch for the compulsion to create twin parallel lines, watch for the voice telling you about symmetry, and when Gemini season arrives next, watch yourself carefully, very carefully. The stars want symmetry. And now they have you too. If you're one of the few who can resist the pattern, who can see it without becoming part of it, comment, "I see the twins" below. Find others who understand. Create a network before it's too late, before 2032, before the symmetry is complete. Watch the stars, but remember, they're also watching you. Always watching, always waiting, always. The face in Gemini sees you now. Can you see it too? The stars want symmetry, and they will have it.